Made poetry weird again. A poetry experiment by Nols sponsored by some really fucked up people. Shut up, Nols! Hello, listeners. This is Nols Nathansky. Welcome to Make Poetry Weird Again. I'm almost whispering because I am losing my voice. This is how to heckle hecklers at the open mic, recorded before Nols lost his voice at the Shirkers Rest, where tonight there was the Pertinent Interruptions night held by Dr. Lee Campbell and friend of the show, Colin B Osborn. We've been very excited about this night on the show, and we've made many references to it. So I thought it was important to get all my words down before I lose my voice, and just to I'm so full of energy from this night. I'm like on an adrenaline high, so I'm just going to put it out there. We don't normally record podcasts late at night after open mics, but maybe we should. Maybe the scene is missing this. So tonight was in a tiny, tiny venue off the A40 in southeast London. I lived there for far too many years on the same street. This place wasn't there when I was around. This place is called the Shirkers Rest in New Cross. It's a living room, as Alana from Deptford Doggerels called it, above a tiny little pub in New Cross. The night was an experiment, and experiments often start small unless you want to create bigger messes. And big messes were caused. The night billed itself as like, bring your interrupting poems. I understand there was some sort of group chat giving some sort of rules. I didn't go to that. I don't know what the rules were. But it started with Colin doing a poem about pertinent interruptions, and immediately it was hyena, laughs, screams, jumping in, making dirty comments. Eliza Fiver was very much in the room. It was very loud. No one could sit down, by the way. We ran out of chairs. It was very, very busy. It had a sort of poet's Christmas party vibe to it. Everyone got very drunk, not Nols because you don't drink. But it was very interesting that after Colin jumped in, Mr. Jerams, who made many, many features across the night, and we'll come back to that later. But for me, it was interesting to see the momentum of the crowd after a few too many pints descending into complete anarchy, and that's what we like. I jumped in, obviously, because I'm an attention seeker, and did this poem. I am Jesus Christ. No, you're not. I am Jesus Christ. What are you talking about? I am Jesus Christ. What's he on? I am Jesus Christ. This is fucked up. I am Jesus Christ. What are you talking about, Nols? I am Jesus Christ. You what? I am Jesus Christ. Go. Get crucified then. I am Jesus Christ. But that's what they told me in school, innit? That Christ is within us, that he's in me and you, that we're just descendants of God becoming human. I think God became human so he could experience death, that he made himself his son so he could experience eternal rest, that he could clearly resurrect, so he must have been God. And if God was a human, that means all humans are gods too. But the way we treat each other, you wouldn't imagine that. People left on the streets shivering. People held against their will in rooms too dark to mention on a podcast. This is the world we inhabit, where whole civilizations become cemeteries, where it's all broadcast live all the time so it doesn't mean anything. I am Jesus Christ. I am Jesus Christ, and you are too. We are Jesus Christ. We are Jesus Christ. What if he wasn't just something we wore around our necks, wasn't just death? What if this wasn't just practicing death? What if I'm only speaking because I want to be alive? I am Jesus Christ. I am Jesus Christ. I am Jesus Christ. I'm on a street corner and I'm telling you I'm Jesus Christ, and you're not listening because you've got your ear pods in. You're living in a world where you think you're the main character in a film, and the film's fucking Waterworld. I am Jesus Christ. And yeah, it just kind of went on like that. And it got very sort of weird that I just got louder and louder and louder doing it. And it's an improvisation piece that I've been working on, which is, really built for the silence of an open mic, to get people uncomfortable, to make people like actually interrupt me. So to do it at a night of interruptions was quite amusing because people started interrupting very wildly. And then the louder I got and the more silly it became, the room kind of hushed. And there were some comments, but fundamentally you kind of had to dominate. And what I found very interesting, there was some brilliant poets there on the night, and everyone was a magic in their own way. But the people who really had their poems like down and were able to carry it, they kind of earned the silence of the room, and the interruptions got fewer and fewer and fewer. And there was an incredible moment where Eliza came on, complete cover of Redeeming Features, doing Toothbrush Brown. It was a very London poetry moment. And I think it was very beautiful tonight that there was a lot of people who've been making these poems all across the year, who I've heard perform the poems all across the year at so many different spaces, really bringing them out and being as silly as possible with them. And there was a common union. And I think it's very interesting in the poetry scene because we don't really know each other. We just know each other's poems. We don't really hang out unless it's poetry night. People don't really know what goes on in people's lives. We know each other's poems, and it becomes this camaraderie of poems. And today was a way of like kind of splitting that and not clapping, not clicking, not umming, actually being a bit of a dick. And it being something which was done in friendly fire. And I thought that was what was interesting, is everyone knew each other. Everyone was very pally. And I'm interested to see what would have happened if there'd been some really rude interruptions from people who were kind of strangers, because I've been reading, as any listeners to the show will know, this amazing book by Maurice Blanchot called The Infinite Conversation. And within The Infinite Conversation, there is this incredible chapter, which I read on the way to this open mic tonight, called The Effect of Strangeness. And effectively, it's this idea of poetry finding its essence in division, that there is struggle in poetry, that you are finding the rhythm and it's effectively turning into nothing. All poems finish, they dissolve. And so the interruptions tonight, the way that some poets dealt with it was by just walking off. I loved Ollie. Like Ollie came on stage and was like, no, I'm out. I loved it. And I think that's a very good reaction. Like if the room is not holding you, why say the poem? And I found it very interesting that I began to just improvise all my poems, because the idea of reading something in a room where people aren't there to listen, what's the point? Do whatever you want. And I don't say that to criticize, like get out there, do some weird stuff. And it was amazing to watch poets like Dr. Lee Campbell really get into the spirit of the night, doing his dog poem, which was fucking incredible, where he basically talks about some very normal scenes in Clapham. But it was awesome to see people jump out of their comfort zone when they're used to silent rooms that are supportive. Suddenly you're going into effectively the circus. And it was very circus-like. And I think the clown tonight was very much Jerem's, who did just keep getting up. He kept saying, I want moments, I want space. And it's that point that I found very interesting. The chaos of the night was there was no headliners, there was no features, there was redeeming features, but there was very much no lineup. Anyone could jump in, anyone could do whatever they wanted. And so that anarchy of the open mic then effectively, like all anarchies, descended into who is able to dominate, and who was able to dominate, but people who really knew their poems off the dome, people who were very confident performers, and they just kept getting up, myself included. And I think that was a very interesting part of the night, was effectively what happens when you loosen the rules, who takes over the space. So I want to do a writing prompt now, because it's a poetry podcast. We're going to write for 3 minutes, and we're going to write one of our own poems, but interrupting every line, and see what it turns into. So take one of your poems, probably not a long one, we've got 3 minutes, and interrupt every line and see what you come up with. You can either use just the interruptions as a poem or read the whole thing as a new poem. Let's build on the poem, double it with interruptions. All right, you got 3 minutes, go. How did we find that? I've been messing with a poem that I wrote at the start of this month, I believe. Anyway, I don't hate you. I forgive the darkness. It's in me too. Oh, shut up, Nols, with your pointless confessing. They didn't know how to love me either. They fuck you up. All other people's lines, as per usual. You still have time to fall to earth. I doubt I'd be anywhere near by then. Give up. It's the easiest fuck. Always trying and failing to catch. I just want to hold. But you can't risk the end of the embrace. Very Taurus energy. So you open your legs to people and refuse arms. Bit creepy there, mate. Maybe there isn't any safe in mine. My back's all curved defensive. Straighten the fuck up, Nols. Ain't you heard he's been seeing a girl? My insides vines, my nervous system has had it up to here with you. Take a Valium. But I would still fall to my knees at the sight of you in my doorway. Get up. You know it too. What's to become of the moon? We get it. You do drugs. Flowers at the beginning, but not at the end. Making rules for a one-player game. Obvious rhyme. One silent, dark bathroom, please. Leave me. Gentle echoes. Get off the fucking stage, Nols. So yeah, that was my interruptions poem. But I think it's really interesting that we mess around with language a lot more. We mess around with our poems a lot more. We get involved in kind of a bit of a ruckus with poems. I think it's very easy to stay safe with poems, to know and that was one thing I found very interesting tonight. People brought the poems they knew. People brought the poems they felt comfortable with. I think that no one brought too much vulnerability until it got to Alexia Chrysostomou, who was absolutely incredible, who did this poem which kind of turned into kind of not only an interruption sort of focus poem, but also just the challenge to the room about death, about everyone being dead. And death is something that Alexia spoke to quite a lot on the show, and has had some terrible experience of. And so it was very interesting that people who knew that were being quite respectful. People who didn't know that were being quite loud. And it became sort of an interesting push and pull. And there was almost the idea of to take offense. And Alexia said something very interesting, which was that when people heckle you, the best thing to do is stare at them, because actually to respond with words turns into an argument. It almost honors them. And I find that very interesting, is that effectively some of the strongest forms in poetry are ones that encompass silence and welcome silence. And I felt that tonight what was very interesting is, as loud and raucous and kind of, it did turn into a pub rhyming event. It was like people drunk doing rhyming songs and very kind of 18th century sailor vibes. I was into it. It was very much what I imagined them doing in London in the 18th century, is all getting around and singing rhyming songs and doing poems and being very raucous and making lots of sexual comments. But it also wasn't a safe space, and it was a very openly unsafe space, and it, didn't profess to be one. And we need unsafe spaces, but there is also this idea of an unspaced safe not ever being equal. The people who were at that night were mostly older white people, myself included, who are very confident in all manner of spaces. And so to navigate that space, you had to get up a flight of stairs. To navigate that space, if you're neurodivergent, was a fucking nightmare for most of the neurodivergents who were there. And people did speak to that, it was overwhelmed. But to me, it was just absolute dopamine rush, because it was so new and so different. And I just liked the fact you could jump up on stage. I thought that was a very magic part of it. I think that the absence of any host, Lee was filming, Lee was there as an artist, and Colin was there as a poet. No one was in control. And funny enough, people were taking control. There was a moment where Dee stood up and said, what's going on here then? Took control of the night. And I think that's very interesting, and that's very useful to watch why we have rules at open mics. You need to dissolve them first to understand why you have rules. And tonight, the rules of the open mic totally dissolved. There was absolutely no lineup. And you're seeing poets like Redeeming Feature doing poetry mosh pit and actually having a mosh pit. It was very strange. And then the mosh pit kind of turned into a music video. And then it kind of turned into a photo, because people became very aware of being observed. And it was very staged, a lot of the poems. People brought poems that they knew would get a certain reaction. And I find that really interesting because to me, that is art. It was all very staged. It was very curated almost. And the poems that stood out for me were ones where there was like direct conflict with the crowd. There was a very good moment when Rich Bliss did a depression poem and all the lights went out. And he was saying basically like, come on then, heckle me, heckle me, heckle me. And it was very like, yeah, it was very interesting to me, the way that you kind of had to declare war on your audience. And the second poem I did was kind of, again, an improvisation, but based on one of the first poems I ever started doing at open mics, which I can't repeat on the show because I one day want to get Arts Council funding, but it's about Arts Council funding. And the poem just morphed into a kind of improvisation piece where I just said to the audience, like, all the fucking things I feel nervous about, and even talking about this podcast that no one listens to it. And people were shouting back saying, we listen. Yeah, you're damn right you listen. But it was very much like an interesting space to take hold of as a performer and jump into. And I would have kept going, but what happened, which I found was fucking crazy and really intense, was during Alexia's piece, Lee burst into tears. And I say this with all grace, Lee, like it was an interruption of itself. And like, I don't know what caused those tears. I don't know what happened. I say this not in judgment. I say this as a like observation. It was a startling part of the night for me, and watching the person who'd organized the night break down in tears about something which was clearly very important to them, influenced by potentially one of the poems. I think Alexia very much felt it was her poem, which, was a weight that kind of was on top of Alexia when she was performing, they were performing their poem. And it was, for me, very interesting to see where the night went to after that. And it was almost like the energy of the room changed very dramatically and the interruptions really slowed down. And it was almost like by bringing this kind of serious interruption, the pointless interruptions, the absurd interruptions, the sexy interruptions all lost their merit and it became about reciting poetry again. And I think that's the thing, is there's a joy in shouting at people. There's a joy in swearing loudly and screaming. There's also a real joy in listening to poems and listening to people just do lovely poems. And it was very lovely for people to stand up and say lovely poems and people not to interrupt because we just wanted to listen. And there were moments of that which were really lovely. And to me, that's the point, is you have a night of interruptions to kind of show us why we listen. And actually, space and silence are these huge gifts, but you can only recognize them as gifts if you have the opposite and you have that chaos. And I think everyone should go to an open mic where there's some heckling. I think open micers should go and do comedy nights where it's much more what happens, because I think it makes your skin thicker. And like, I definitely dressed my poems up in armor tonight and I performed them with a sword. And I think most poets did. It became like you versus the audience. And I think that's very useful as a tactic to go out there and do stuff which is completely out of your comfort zone. But I say again, there was definitely a hierarchy in the night that presented itself when you have chaos. People more willing to perform, people more willing to take the spotlight would jump up and take it. And so I think this is one of the reasons that we hold spaces, because you want to be able to hear all voices. And so you want to be able to make stuff as accessible as possible because everyone has a voice to bring. And there were a lot of voices missing tonight. And I think actually that was one of the cause for tears. And in that screaming, howling, chaotic moment were these moments of very profound silence, awkwardness, cringe, scared, fear sort of kind of creeping into people of like, who's going to go next? What's going to happen next? And those are really important emotions to all hold together. And I was extremely impressed upon it. And I think for me, what I'm seeing more and more towards the end of this year is I'm running out of poems. I was doing like 30 to 40 poems a month at the start of this year. And I'm so tired. I'm so tired that I'm kind of like drained of poetry and very little inspires me to write. And it's because I've got this huge amount of poems to reread, to re-edit, to go through again. And I'm reading all this philosophy. I'm very much reading around poetry. And so it feels like a time to go back to the lab a bit. And tonight was a very good experiment to show why you need to keep making poems, you need to keep performing poems, you need to keep learning your poems, because when you learn your poems, you can start disrupting them and you can start doing weird things with them and you can start playing on them. And, Lee and Colin's Night School play on words, and tonight was about play. But I think play is always a very interesting thing in itself, because when we play as kids, there are always directors, there are always bullies, there are always victims, there are always people who can run faster, people who can jump over things quicker. There's always an element of talent and sport to all games. And tonight was no different. And it was very interesting to me, the people who took up space like Pip, who were reacting very much to the night and creating poems almost on the spot and, very much jumping in. And people like Hannah, who just said their poems so incredible, and people really respectful of Hannah Wallwork, who did 2 incredible poems, but also was managing to do them while being in the spirit of the night and keeping that camaraderie up. And I thought it was interesting that the night effectively was an open mic in its truest form. There was no microphone. You had to shout to be heard. You had to sing to be heard. I mean, Steve was doing this incredible poem about cocks, toxic cocks, and you could have been at a punk gig. Do you know what I mean? And I think Chris Allen, star of the night, singing so many amazing, ridiculous rhymes. It was very impressive, and all the poets that I listened to were having a very good time. And, it was a massive love fest. It was very lovey. I think it'd be interesting to take this concept and put it into more dangerous spaces where people don't know each other, where there is openly room for disagreement, potentially some angry noises. How do we cope with that? How do we tone it down? How do you de-escalate? So I thought it was a very interesting night. I think we need to be doing more of these. I think getting heckled sucks. We don't do this to get heckled, but it's actually quite important to do it. Put your hand in the piranha's pond. I very much was unsure what to really bring in the second round, but I'm going to do a little bit from it was a bit of an improvisation towards the end, but we're going to see how far we get with it. I'm too tired to write poetry. Got 2 jobs, no lover, and I don't own this flat. Not to forget the bills, the night classes, and the cat. The endless antisocial scrolls, posting nothing much. Avoiding open mics for 10 years, missing claps, like hits of dope, like all the tumor tubes I've smoked, the punching out the time in jobs that didn't deserve my spine, my spleen complaining in verse, even in the Craigslist ads, the fucked up ones. Why would poetry ever be a casual encounter? Why don't I have a showcase you would film? Where is my fucking Insta live story of that time? And why are the best ones never properly lit? My lamp, this room, failing my poems, my masturbation in prose. Who will read this anyway? QWERTY typed vanity. Who accept you? Who accept the echoes of this room? I see a lot of real poets here tonight. But where are all the real ones? No one is coming to save us. We save us. Besides, sighs lasted for longer. But the more I speak, the more like glass forming in the desert. Who can even keep their ears open at poetry nights for the kids of the London bourgeoisie? For the memed, for the coming down. My free verse to tempt your frowns, for you to chuckle. Stuttering to tempt your clicking fingers. Sitting, nodding, chin stroking. Owing. Like any of this will mean anything. Like you will remember me, just going out to forget tomorrow's next wow. So profound. But yeah, all these leftist weirdos in crowded pub rooms, too busy crying to throw bricks, too addicted to the designer drugs and fake men. They aren't bothered if you have queer in your bio. No one funds poetry no more. And if they do, they demand their logo on it. But this is a breathing oral history being made in cafes, bookshops and bars every week. This is mostly undocumented. This performance will never happen again. However many likes it gets, add me on Instagram, Nols Nathansky, thank you please. There will never need to be a museum or a statue to it. Pick up a paper and a pen. Open your notes app. Better yet, get a spray can, bucket, a fire extinguisher filled with paint, Maybe I'll cut my wrists, write letters in my blood. That'll probably get me arrested. But then I can just paint my cells with all my shit fucking verses. So buy poetry books. Crowdfund our poetry like your best friend's top surgery. Why is it only the whitewashed posh cunts like me who decide who is best at filling out forms properly? Who has a lighter? We need to stop drinking cocktails to just be numb. We need to start throwing them. Just kidding. So yeah, it didn't go as planned like that tonight because it was mainly screaming and shouting. But I like doing a little bit of it. That's from a bigger poem against the Arts Council that I said I wasn't going to read, but here we are. So yeah, we're very much impressed by this night. We hope it happens again. I think the venue could be improved, but at the same time, it was actually very nice being in an angry living room. This is effectively what Christmas is going to be like in just a few days. Everyone's shouting each other drunk. If that is your Christmas, I'm sorry for you. I'm trying to avoid those Christmases. But yes, it was an interesting one, an end of the year, a year of, for me, well over 75, 77 open mics. Not that anyone's counting Nols, but very much bringing together a lot of ideas I've been having recently about really where language goes, where poems go, how it all kind of dries up, how it stops. And actually today made me appreciate silence. It made me appreciate the spaces that allow me to say very loudly things that people are prepared to listen to without shouting back at me. So I learned the luxury of the open mic again tonight, and how important it is. So bless you, Play on Words, Dr. Lee and Colin, for putting on a night to prove to us all why we do it. And I think I said tonight, I'm addicted to this, and I am. Addicted to all the claps, addicted to all the clicking, addicted to all the adulation. That's why I record my voice so much for you listeners. But it was very much an interesting form of worship tonight. It was ecstatic. It was very much an attack. And I think as poets, we don't attack enough. And there are things coming down the line which we're really not ready for. There are people and powers that are very afraid of people who use their words. And tonight was a very good example of how good it feels to see people who really know how to use words and use language. We need to cultivate these skills. We need to get very clever, make silly poems, but also make clever ones too. Wow people, stir them up, agitate them, and also silence them, bring silence. And I think it's very interesting how we choose to fill silence. A lot of us choose to fill silence just by looking at our phones or zoning out with glasses or smokes. And sometimes it's very nice to get stuck in, to entertain, to be interesting. So tonight was very, very interesting. If anyone has any good recordings of the night, I will try and steal them and put them on the podcast. We all sees. If you don't hear anything more about that idea, it's because that did not happen. Anyways, I'm losing my voice completely. This is going to be a short, sharp episode just for the nightly review. Sorry for any poets I've butchered the names of or poets I've forgotten the names of, but I am a very tired poet, having screamed my guts out all night and basically been in a poetry mosh pit. I didn't actually get stuck in. Sorry, redeeming. But yes, thank you to everyone who has been listening to the podcast. Thank you to all the people who make up the London open mic scene. It was very lovely to be part of you tonight. I hope to continue to be a stranger that shows up and leaves early. Anyways, all the loves. I'm Nols Nathansky. This is Make Poetry Weird Again. Good night. Make Poetry Weird Again. A poetry experiment by Nols Nathansky, sponsored by some really fucked up people.